Welcome to Summer Series Episode 6, in which we have more curated insight. I hope you found a lot of value in the episode where Courtney shared her favorite episodes and we put them together into sort of a playlist in one episode. We're going to do the same thing now. And this time it is Sunflower, or Sunflowers Are Pretty, which is someone who comments very frequently on our YouTube channel who has, is leaving the struggle and is helping other people in the community in a really, really wonderful way. So actually, first of all, thanks so much, Sunflower, not just for providing us with your curated insight here, but for all the help you do in the comment section. Really, really wonderful to see. And so, yeah, let's take a look at the message from Sunflower here, which goes as follows. Every single one of your insight videos has helped me a lot. It would be a disservice to pick and choose one among all those amazing life-changing topics you covered. Now, if I had to, it's not easy to do, select one which would potentially help many others, it would be insights on hyperarousal. This is one of the most puzzling things, and learning about it is a game changer. Next, gas and brake model. I remember watching that one last year in the early days of finding your channel, and it was a ray of hope that kept me going. When we're living with insomnia, our minds could never look at one small good thing or how the entire mechanism works in our favor, as it's misunderstood and we loathe it. Once I knew and saw how my body had gas, aka sleep drive, even if it was after a week or days of no sleep, I used it to collect evidence to support and solidify the belief that I can still sleep again. Another one would be logic versus wisdom. Loved that. Oh, and I forget to add, thought model. I even wrote down my own notes and could see a pattern because previously everything was fuzzy. I know the list keeps going. Sunrise and sunset anxiety, both teaching the concept of performance anxiety, where you're on edge because you know time's short and you've not slept. This is all for now. Remember something, I'll mail you a second time. Yeah, please do. But in the meantime, we're going to look at all these episodes that Sunflower mentioned. However, Sunflower also mentions the model. And to find that one, just you can search on Google for Insomnia Insight Thought Model, and you'll find that it's actually a playlist. Now, if you do look at that playlist, you'll see that my thoughts have changed. Like most of that thought model, I think is very, very helpful to kind of just understand ourselves. But that thought model, which I borrowed from the Life Coach School and Brooke Castillo, talks about how we can kind of deliberately changing our thoughts, which I think is quite tricky. I think it's really almost always more helpful to just kind of be observers and let things come and go. That leads to peace of mind. But anyway, you can check out the thought model. But with that said, let us now look at the curated insight from Sunflower. Hope this will bring a lot of value your way. Have you felt yourself trapped in a constant state of hyperarousal, locked in a fight or flight mode that just goes on throughout the day, day after day? If so, this episode is for you. In this episode, we're going to see how constant hyperarousal evolves in insomnia. We're going to see that it's actually a key component of any deep-seated inner struggle, and we look at how to meet constant hyperarousal in a way that it fades and leads you to where you want to be, a place of peace of mind and peaceful sleep. Let's take a look. Welcome again. So glad you're here because I think this episode has the potential of really helping you and helping so many people that have faced this situation. And the reason I decided to talk about this now is that just a week or two ago, we had a student in one of our teams in the Insomnia Immunity program who said exactly this. She said that she felt trapped in like a constant fight or flight mode. And this is not the first time somebody has said this, but there was some realizations that led me to see that, okay, insomnia has a component to it that I had not overlooked, but I hadn't really seen the full impact of. So that's a little backdrop, but we'll get to these things in a second. For now, let's just look at the outline of this class here. Firstly, we're going to talk about like the evolution of constant hyperarousal, how it happens, how it comes to be, and then we're going to look at what I now think of as a tussle and a struggle with insomnia, and then how to meet this state of constant hyperarousal. So yeah, the evolution of constant hyperarousal. We define insomnia on our channel as an ongoing and self-perpetuating struggle with sleep that is rooted in a fear of not sleeping. And I believe this is true. This is what insomnia comes from. But there's a but here. If being awake at night was really the only thing that our brain had identified as a threat that we were afraid of, the difficulties with sleep would become self-limiting. What would happen would be that we would eventually find ourselves awake at night and realize that it's okay, where nothing really happens, and the fear would subside by its own. It's similar to, like, if you use this silly example of balloons, that one can have a balloon pop near the ear, and we become kind of rattled and scared of balloons, and that can be maintained. That fear can be maintained by us avoiding balloons, like not ever going near a balloon again, because when we avoid something, we inadvertently teach our brain that is something to be avoided, something to be feared. But if, on the other hand, this person, was okay with, meeting balloons again, or seeing balloons again, or touching balloons again, they would kind of feel that, they would teach themselves that there is nothing to be afraid of, right? The fear of balloons would go away. But, the thing here with this example is that balloons is something we can avoid forever, and we can maintain the fear of balloons forever in this way. But it's different with the night. The night, every day ends with the night, and we will all at some point be awake at night. So if the only thing we were afraid of was being awake at night, eventually we would see that there isn't something to be afraid of just by experience. In other words, we can see that fear of being awake alone, it can create something of a tussle, some difficulties with sleep, but for like a real struggle, an ongoing struggle, something else needs to happen. And so this is what happens. We start being afraid of not sleeping, typically because there's some stress in our lives. We are awake, which is typical when we're stressed. Our nervous brain, which is kind of hypervigilant, it starts identifying being awake as a threat. It's like, oh no, we're not sleeping enough. We got to do something about this. And then the sleep effort starts. Then we do something like we take some melatonin, but we can't control sleep. We can't outrun a perceived threat. So the sleep efforts don't solve our problem. It actually creates more of a sense of insecurity, and we have more struggle. We become more afraid. And what now happens is the key difference here, that when we have kind of this increasing amount of fear due to the efforts, then we can have a whole bunch of experiences. When we're scared, we constantly think about the same thing. We may have palpitations. We may be breathing fast. We may be shaking. We may be feeling dizzy. We may have like a knot in our stomach. All these things can be so uncomfortable that our brain, that is in this hypervigilant state, it goes, oh no, this is no good. This is a threat. This is dangerous now. In other words, what's happening is we become afraid of feeling afraid. Our brain identifies fear as a threat and as a danger. And this fear can become greater than the fear of not sleeping. And what we can see so clearly now is, again, how if we only were afraid of not sleeping, we would eventually not sleep and learn by experience that this is nothing dangerous. But on the other hand, when fear triggers fear, this is something different. We can see how when we become scared of something, and then we're like, oh no, I'm scared. That means we're scared of being scared, right? That creates this escalating situation with fear triggers more fear, which triggers more fear, which maintains the fear, And so this fear of fear, this is what leads us to a state of like constant hyperarousal. I think this is really key to understand, because when we understand this, there's so much demystification that happens. We no longer think that, oh, there's something wrong in my brain or my immune system or my hormonal system or something like that. We see that, this is it. I become afraid of being afraid, and this maintains this loop. And I made this note for myself to not forget this, that I want to share that I hadn't really fully seen this until recently. I'd often come across people describing things that sounded like fear of fear. And I thought that, I would teach around that. This is fear of fear. It's common. It's common, and sometimes we have that. I thought of it as kind of a facet or something that some people sometimes experience. But what I'm now seeing is that it's actually, a core component of any like inner struggle, like, generalized, what we call generalized anxiety, right? That's fear of fear, right? Panic attacks. It's literally like we're afraid of feeling fear, right? And I think really all inner struggle is rooted in this fear of fear or fear of other emotions or inner experiences. And so next topic here I wanted to just touch on was this, like, what in my mind is becoming the difference between like a tussle and a struggle. And I wrote down some experience, examples that could help us understand this. So if somebody says, and this is common, somebody says like, I had short bouts of insomnia, but nothing like this. This is a common in our Talking Insomnia episodes when somebody says like, many years ago, I had a little bit of a difficulty sleeping, but nothing like this. That to me now is like a tussle. That person probably had a bit of worries around not sleeping. Maybe there was some effort, but it didn't turn into a fear of the emotions that came with being afraid of being awake. Like, it never became a fear situation. So it became self-limiting. It kind of corrected itself. Or somebody who says, oftentimes somebody in our community has told a friend or something that they are struggling with sleep, and the friend says, yeah, I had insomnia too. I took some melatonin and that fixed it for me. To me, this was a tussle again. This is somebody who became a bit worried about their sleep. There was a bit of fear of not sleeping there, but it wasn't deep rooted. They kind of experienced and that being awake at night didn't do anything, and this became self-limiting. On the other hand, if someone says like, I sleep every night right now, but I'm not feeling any better, my days are consumed by worries. To me, this signals that there's much more here than a fear of not sleeping. There is a fear of fear underlying this. And similar with this one, somebody says like, I'm actually okay with not sleeping. I hear what you're saying, Daniel. I've done my work here, and I completely understand that being awake is not harmful, and I'm actually okay with that. I'm actually okay with being awake at night, but it's the next day that really gets me. And what does that mean? Well, the next day there will be a lot of experiences of fear, like, again, the palpitations, the shakiness, the jitteriness, which is fear. That all comes from fear. And when we're afraid of that, then we have the struggle, then we have the fear of fear. So, knowing this, the natural question now becomes, so how do we meet the situation? How do we meet the situation where we have this constant hyperarousal state? Well, I want to start here, thinking of this like tussle situation again, where the main issue, if you will, is that we're afraid of not sleeping, right? We can see that just education around this and what we call befriending wakefulness will really help. Because when somebody understands that, being awake is safe, okay, get it, and they start, instead of trying to escape being awake at night, then they go towards like, okay, when I'm awake at night, I'm going to do something I like, or something like resting, or whatever feels easy for me. Then they're teaching their brain that being awake is safe, and these difficulties fade. So befriending wakefulness and education will help when we are in a tussle, and it will also help when we indirectly turn befriending wakefulness into a way of not only befriending wakefulness, but befriending the emotions that come with it. I often say that befriending wakefulness is a camouflaged way of also befriending the emotions that come with it. And often, even without teaching around fear of fear, this often happens. Somebody starts being like, okay, I'm going to do something I like to do at night. And that actually not only becomes a way to being okay with being awake, but also okay with whatever emotions come with it. In other words, befriending wakefulness became befriending anxiety. It became like befriending fear. And I think this is really, really what helps, because that constant hyperarousal is sustained by us treating fear as a threat, right? And the constant hyperarousal will fade when we educate our brain that fear is a normal human emotion and it's completely harmless. We may feel very, very alarmed, and our brain was signal to us very, very intensely, you get to do something about this. This is not good. You have to do something. But just because we feel very alarmed doesn't mean that there's something that requires us to be alarmed or something to be alarmed about. So that leads to kind of the practical thing. Okay, so what do you mean? Like, so what do I actually do here, Daniel? And this is where it comes a little bit tricky, because what we're going to talk about here is actually very, very common in any like meaningful, helpful approach. Uh, they will say the same thing, but in very, very different words. Some people may talk about acceptance. We use often the word befriending. Some people say non-resistance. Some people say letting go, letting be, sitting with it, exposure. This can sound like there are many, many different things, and I got to find out how to do this correctly. But in reality, whatever word is used, they all mean the same thing. They all mean being willing to experience fear without trying to stop it. And then people can be like, okay, so, well, how do I do that? Well, I would say there are sort of like two ways we can do that. One is more deliberate, and one is more like, let's say, passive. And the deliberate way is to set up a little time every day, for example, to just sit with it, to just be like, okay, now I'm just gonna sit here and be scared, and just to allow ourselves to feel the emotion without doing anything about it. But I very recently, a student shared that he had sort of taken this to mean that you should sit with the fear until it goes away, and he'd found himself sitting for an hour or so, and becoming actually more and more anxious and more revved up, which is in my mind, because then sitting with fear started feeling like a chore or an obligation or something we have to do to make the fear go away, which then again turns it in more to an effort, right? An attempt to escape it. So I think, yes, we can deliberately sit with our fear or our emotions, but it doesn't have to be a long time, and we can actually uh, befriend fear or accept fear or whatever we'll call it, just as much when we're living our lives. We can eat a taco while feeling scared, and acknowledge the fear and seeing that it's there without trying to make it go away. Or we can hang out with our friends or read a book, and the fear can be there in the background. We can acknowledge it without making it go away. All of this is really acceptance. It is befriending. It is letting go. It's letting be. It's whatever you want to name it, is experiencing fear without trying to make it go away. And when our brain sees that we are safe, then we find ourselves where we want to be, a place of peaceful sleep and peace of mind. That was all for this episode. Hope you found it really valuable, and look forward to having you back real soon. Hi, I'm Coach Daniel. If you want to sleep amazingly well for the rest of your life, this channel is for you. An extremely important episode tonight. We're going to talk about sleep physiology using the gas and break model. You're going to see that you can use this model to explain any insomnia-related phenomenon. And we're going to talk about where I had it wrong in the past. It is not the gas that is most important. It is the break. Hey there, and welcome back. As mentioned, a really important episode here. And again, thanks to Jura for requesting this. So, we are going to talk about how sleep is regulated, but we are going to take a little detour first into the world of eating. It makes a really good analogy. So imagine this. Imagine that you think about what makes you want to eat. Not very complicated. You want to eat because you have an appetite. You're hungry. But then ask yourself this. What do you do to become hungry? Sometimes I do this in clinic. I just ask people, so what do you do to become hungry? And I'm looking for the reaction of, I don't know, I just nothing in particular. And that's exactly my point. You don't have to do anything to become hungry. Just by not eating, you become hungry. You build an appetite. The longer you go without eating, the hungrier you become. When it comes to eating, the gas in our system is appetite. The more appetite you have, the more you're going to eat. Now, there is a break in the eating system as well. Imagine that you're really hungry, but someone serves you this rotten, spoiled fish. What happens to your hunger? It goes away. That's a break. The break in our eating system is negative emotions such as disgust. Pretty easy, right? Gas is appetite, and the break is negative emotion. Guess what? Just the same when it comes to sleep. There's only this one thing that produces sleep, that makes you want to sleep, that makes your body want to sleep, and that's our sleep drive, sleepiness, if you will. And only one thing produces that gas in our sleep system. And what is it? What is it that makes you sleepy?
It's wakefulness. Wakefulness is the only thing that can produce sleep drive, your body's need for sleep. Now, there's of course a break here in the sleep system as well, and that break is hyperarousal. That is any type of like heightened emotional state, like anxiety, worry, preoccupation, or excitement as well. All that acts as the break in our sleep system. And that is it, folks. That is it. The gas and the brake, that is what regulates how we sleep. And the first one of the main reasons I think this is so important is this, that by reading online, by hearing what people say, and by your own experiences, you can easily get this notion that sleep is really complicated because you've tried a lot of things. Some things seem to work, some things didn't work, and some things worked sometimes, but not other times. You hear that the light is very important, what you eat is important, your exercise level is important, coffee is important, all things are important. That can lead you to believe that sleep is complicated because it's not. That notion that it's complicated makes you anxious because you have to control all these things. Knowing that it is simple is in itself a real relief, that gives you a sense of like, this is not very complicated. It's just the gas and the brake, gas and brake. That's all it is. Now, that said, there are these four scenarios you can have when it comes to that gas and brake. One is you have neither, like you don't have much gas and not much brake. This means you're not sleepy and you're not worried. This means you're awake and you have a regular day, right? Then you can have this scenario. You're not sleepy, you have no gas, and you have a brake. And in this scenario, you're going to be very awake. You're going to be like hyper awake. You're definitely not going to sleep in this scenario. Or you can have this one. This is the most common one when you have trouble sleeping. You are sleep deprived to some degree. Your body needs sleep. There is a sleep there. There is some gas going on, but you're also hyperaroused. There's breaking as well. So you're in and out of sleep. It's like it takes a long time to fall asleep, but finally you do, but then you wake up again and then you fall back asleep. And then, you have this in and out, fragmented, superficial, vivid dreams, that kind of thing. That's like the gas fighting the brake the whole night. That's classic insomnia. Now, you also can have this there, of course. Strong gas, you really need to sleep, and you're not worried at all. No hyperarousal. And guess what? Then you're going to sleep really, really well. This is where you want to get. And that's where I had it wrong in the past. You may have heard me say this, that the gas is important, but it's complicated working on that. So the brake is important, but it's complicated. So you better work on the gas. Make sure you get up early, stay awake, pretty late, build up that gas, and it will override the brake. And when it does, you start seeing that you can sleep, and the whole thing just becomes much better. The problem with my thinking in the past was that it implies controllability of sleep. It implied that if you just kept yourself awake for long enough, you're gonna sleep, and etc. And the problem with that is that it becomes a sleep effort. You're kind of like fighting yourself. I gotta stay awake a little longer. But when you do that, you're purposely trying to build sleep drive, but just keeping yourself awake for such a long time. Guess what you're doing? You're also building so much break, because you're getting nervous and anxious and stressed about, like, do I have enough sleep, or etc. And that's where I had it wrong. It can work for a lot of people. It Getting up early and staying up late, that simple thing can work for a lot of people, but it can also create this problem with, like, as you're working on the gas, you're also working on the brake. If you're trying to force sleep, you're becoming more hyper aroused. So my understanding now is that it is really mostly about the gas. Of course, you can have a brake. It's mostly about the brake. You can have a gas problem as well if you sleep in during the day, and if you take a nap, and if you try to sleep, and if you fall asleep in the evening. Then it's true, you don't have enough gas. Then you have a gas problem. But the brake problem is the big one. So how do you work on that brake problem? This is another insight. I used to think, again, that spending less time in bed was really to build a break, but spending less time in bed is really about letting go of that chasing sleep behavior, taking that psychological step away from trying to sleep. That's why it's important to spend less time in bed. When you're getting to that point, when you're willing to have some insomnia, you're not afraid of it anymore, you're willing to spend less time in bed, your break goes away. And that is really the most important thing with spending less time in bed. Now, other ways, of course, of working on that break is education. That's hugely important. When you understand sleep, you understand it's simple, it's not complicated, you get it, and the break really fades away. Super important. And now, I want to really make one more point here, and that is this one, that in understanding this gas and break model, you can explain really any scenario you are in. If you're in bed, you're not falling asleep, that is either because there's insufficient gas or there's too much break, you know? And if you're not particularly worried, then maybe it is a gas issue. But if you're a little bit, if you're worried and preoccupied, you have a brake issue, right? Or if you like keep waking up throughout the night, that means that you have too much brake going on, right? Or if you find that, so for example, oh, I get my best sleep at 5 a.m. Why is that? Well, it's because you've been awake from 12 midnight and your gas keeps increasing, and at 5 a.m you kind of given up on sleep, you're not trying to sleep anymore, and your break goes away. And so any phenomenon, anything that you find happening when it comes to your sleep, like this kind of insomnia stuff, all that can be explained using the gas and break model. In fact, I anybody who has like a scenario that you're like, how about this one? Please let me know. Leave a comment or send an email to questions@thesleepcoachschool.com, and I will explain how that can be explained using the gas and break model. Now, for those of you who are really into this, you will throw in a circadian rhythm thing. And it's true, circadian rhythms play a role too. And I don't factor that in the gas and break model because they so rarely play a role. Yes, if you're traveling across time zones, you have to think about circadian rhythm too. That is true. But for all real practical purposes, it's all gas and break, gas and break, gas and break. That's all there is to it. So I hope you enjoyed this one. If you have any questions, as I mentioned, send an email or write a comment. And do know this, that all the episodes here, all I talk about here is an effort to make you sleep amazingly well without ever spending a dollar. I really hope that you never, ever, ever will need a sleep coach or anything of that nature. But if you find that you do need a little bit more support, accountability, education than you get from these videos, then please consider checking out the self-coaching master program at thesleepcoachschool.com. With that said, look forward to hearing from you and having you back here. And until then, take it easy.
Hi there, and hope you had a nice weekend. We are going to look at an analogy that I found really, really, really amazing, and I hope you'll like it, and I hope you'll see the value of sort of like, you know, cross pollination. Taking teachings from another ecosystem and mix it with ours, or like contextualize it to what we teach here. Oftentimes, I think it's when we hear something in a different way, in a new way, that things can really click. So this is why I wanted to share the pea brain analogy here. That I want to first of all thank Lily Seiss for sharing with us slash with me. I was on a call with Lily. By the way, Lily is an anxiety coach, has a big following on TikTok and Instagram, and she said something about like pea brain, and I didn't understand it immediately, but after the call I was like, oh, Lily, I think I understand it now. And I shared how I saw it with her, and she's like, she said, yeah, I think you got it. I don't remember exactly if she sort of completely approved with the way I was using it, but I think it made sense. And so I wrote a newsletter about this pea brain analogy. And actually, by the way, just quickly here, we'll get into the teaching in a second, but as soon as I sent out the newsletter Friday, I got a copy myself, and the title was just like pea brain, and I was like, oh my gosh, I hope I didn't like insult all of the people getting the newsletter, thinking that I was like, hey, pea brain. Of course it wasn't like that. It was just like I just named it that because it doesn't name the analogy, but it was a comic moment. I was like, oh my gosh, what did I do? But anyways, that happened. I hope nobody was insulted by getting an email saying pea brain. Of course, that was just the name of the analogy. And now I sent a copy of it to Lily herself, thanking her for it. And she said, she said, oh, this was so nicely written. So that was very nice to hear, of course. But she said also, she said, credit goes to Christine Heath from the Psychology Has It Backwards podcast. So I want to mention Christine also and thank her as well for the pea brain analogy. And Now I have to reach out to Christine also, see if she wants to be a guest here and share her wisdom with us. But anyway, that was the backstory of this analogy. Now let's get into it. And I want to start here. We can sort of divide the brain, or how we think about the brain, into two parts, if we will. We can think of the brain as having like a conscious part and a subconscious part. And I think this doesn't merit very much further teaching. We all know, like, the conscious part is like things like, I can decide to lift this hand, like this, or some things are under kind of our conscious control and some things are subconscious. There's stuff going on that we are not really aware of, right? And if we expand on this, we can think of the body, the entirety of us, as having logic and wisdom. And what I mean by logic and wisdom, well, basically logic is something that is seated in the brain, logically figure out things, and wisdom is broader than that. So we can think of logic, if we think of, again, we think of the brain and the body like a human being as having logic. Well, logic is something that is consciously figure outable, and it sort of resides in the brain, if you will. That's logic. And then we also have what Lily, and I think others in her community, which is the 3P community, 3 principles community, call wisdom. And wisdom, when it comes to, in this context, is is centered around things that are not consciously figure outable, things that we just cannot logically figure out with our brain, if we will. So with this little intro here, we're gonna for the first time ever gamify this video by playing Guess the Domain. So we're gonna play Guess the Domain here real quickly, and I'm gonna give you two examples, and I'm gonna ask you to guess to which domain this task belongs to, whether this is in the purview of logic or the purview of wisdom. So the first one is this: figuring out how to open a can of Japanese tomatoes, or maybe I should say a Japanese can of tomato, Japanese tomato can, or something like that. But just imagining that you're familiar with a certain can of tomatoes and how to open it, but you're in this exotic place. So I just picked Japan, and we're going to assume that the cans look different. They're a little different. So what are we going to use to open these cans? Is going to be logic or wisdom? If you said logic, that was the correct answer here. We can look at a can of tomatoes and just deduce about thinking, pondering. Oh yeah, I think I figure out how to do this, right? That is logic. How about this one? Growing a baby inside a mother's womb, making sure that the baby has 2 arms, 2 legs, a nose, a liver, and making sure all those little organs are working correctly. Is this in the purview of logic or wisdom? Well, if you said wisdom, that is correct. There's just no way we can control this or really understand this and do this, logically. This is beyond that. This is in the purview of wisdom. Now we're going to ask ourselves another question, which is, what happens if we try to deploy logic for a task that is outside of its purview? And so the way I, answer this question is actually by another analogy, an analogy with an analogy, if you will. And it is by imagining a child, like, I don't know, a 10-year-old child to create a solar system with like a sun and 8 planets and things of that nature. How is that child going to react? Well, there can be a range of reactions, and we could have, for example, comic disbelief, and we can have like significant inner struggle. Comic disbelief, it would be when the child goes like, just thinks that this is a joke, like, how am I going to be able to do that, and just like thinks you're just playing with her. But if for some reason we asked this in a very serious way, we said like, please do this, and there was some pressure behind it, and the child really thought, oh my gosh, they really wanted me to do this, they expect me to do this, that could be really, really anxiety provoking for this little child, right? Because they have no clue how to do that, And so with this in mind, let us actually contextualize this for our community, for what we talk about here, which is insomnia and the struggles with sleep, of course. And I was toying around with the idea of like introducing another, like, guess the purview here or guess the domain here. But I said, let me just actually cut to kind of the real insight here, or the real teaching point here, which is that sleep, of course, falls into the purview of wisdom. There is no way any human being can control sleep logically or make sure sleep happens. Or this is not a task for which the logic part of the brain is designed. And the same thing, not only kind of sleep, generally speaking, but falling asleep, when we wake up, staying asleep, that all belongs to wisdom. So does thoughts, producing thoughts and producing emotions, sensations. And the subconscious domain is also like, this is all within wisdom. This is not, not places where logic has control, where there's no, this is outside of the purview of logic. And I think that is, in a way, for safety reasons. Like, imagine if we could consciously control, the enzymes in our liver, or the speed of digestion through our intestinal tracts, and or the growth of our fingernails, or falling in love and things like that. It would be just overwhelming, and confusing, and frankly dangerous, if those were within the logic purview. So I think it's for safety reasons that this is all already baked into kind of like the human, body mind complex, to take care of this. It's already built in, like, Now, here's the thing, like, when we're in a struggle, of course, we want that struggle to end, and we want to have a sense of control. So what we often do is this misassignment, if you will. We misassign logic. We task logic to regulate sleep. And for the reasons we have seen above, this can lead to significant inner struggle. And I think lots of this is probably familiar to you if you follow the channel for a while, but I thought this analogy was a new take on it, because or I put it this way, what I see as new here is this picture of like this little child who's asked to create a solar system or something like that, which is like completely outside of what a child can do, right? And it can be so clear that, oh my gosh, what we're asking here is just, it's like saying, asking somebody to willfully, grow a baby in their wombs again. Like, it's just, we cannot do that with our logic brain, with our P brain. And we see this clearly. I think that can lead to so much relief. Actually, it can be like, oh my gosh, I've been trying to task this like logic part of my brain with something that's completely outside of its purview. And of course I've struggled because of this, which is, not an invitation to self-kindness. We always do this. We all deploy logic to things that are outside the scope of logic. But just seeing this can be so clearly. So misassigning logic to regular sleep can lead to significant inner struggle. But I want to say that something that actually falls within the purview of logic and is really helpful is education. Like this, listening to this, learning, picking up a book, reading. That, education to me is logic. Like, we can deploy our logic brain to learn something. Now, then again, like, we can learn something, and how this education like translates into change, that on the other hand is kind of on the purview of wisdom again. So logic has its limitation, but when we task the P brain, which is, what how Lily used this analogy, what I call logic here, she basically called P brain, the little brain. When we task our brain with learning, for example, or things that is within its purview, then it can reach the limits of logic, and then it can let wisdom take it from there. And I think oftentimes we need that. We need to sort of understand what we're dealing with, or what's, we need the educational foundation to then see, aha, now I see it clearly. Now I can let wisdom take over and lead me to where I want to be, which is that place of peaceful sleep and peace of mind. I hope this analogy was helpful on your path to where we all want to be. And if you're finding your way there, then please let us know. Write a comment, or in some other way share it with us. It would be really nice to hear that. On the other hand, if you find that things are not easy, you're struggling, it's hard for you to see a path to where you want to be, you would like a little bit more support and education presented to you in a logical way on your path to where you want to be, then head over to thesleepcoachschool.com, check out our coaching options. And if you decide to join any of our programs, then we look forward to seeing you on the other side. That was it for today. Again, let me know what you thought about this, and look forward to having you here back soon. Until then, I'll just say bye-bye. Ciao, ciao. Have you found that even though you feel okay during the day, you get more and more anxious the closer it gets to the night? For every passing hour, you become even more worried. Your heart's beating, you're feeling tingly and jumpy and sweaty. If so, you've experienced what we call sunset anxiety, a very common insomnia experience. In this episode, you're going to learn where it comes from and how to meet it to arrive at a place where, even though it's getting dark outside, you feel peace of mind, which then leads to peaceful sleep. Hi there, welcome back to Insomnia Insight number. I don't even know what number it is, but it's a big number. We have made a lot of videos over the years, but I think this one is special. Really, really special. It's actually a very unique episode, and I'll tell you why in a second. But again, today we are going to talk about what we call sunset anxiety. And the reason we do this is because it is a common experience. I've heard something like this many, many times over the years. The closer to bedtime I get, the more anxious I feel. So in this episode, we are going to understand sunset anxiety. Where does it come from? Why do we have this experience? And we're going to see how to meet sunset anxiety. Really just two segments in this class. But here is a little anecdote about like why this is a special class and where it came from. So last week, I was sitting down with a lot of data, which is data from our chatbot Ellie, who runs on like ChatGPT, and I've trained Ellie. And so I was feeding these like test questions to Ellie, and one of them was very similar to what I just wrote here. It was something like, "What should I do if I become more and more anxious as the sun falls?" And in fact, I wrote something like, "Is it normal to feel more anxious as night falls?" And Ellie, our chatbot in this like test environment, said, "Oh yeah, this is very, very normal, and we call this sunset anxiety." And I was like, "Wow, that was a nice expression," because when you hear sunset anxiety, you immediately know what this is about. And it just struck me, and then I was like, "Wow, I should make a video about this. Sunset anxiety is great." So I always try to give credit where credit is due. So credit for this one goes to our sleep bot Ellie for finding the sunset anxiety expression. And Ellie, by the way, is in our app BedTyme in case you want to chat with Ellie. But yeah, with that said, we're going to go to the first segment here, which is understanding sunset anxiety. Why do we have this experience? So the first thing I want to say is that it can really help to know that you're not experiencing anything strange or unusual. For me as a sleep coach, I've heard this more times than I can count, but for every person who's going through a struggle, it can seem like you're going through something very unique and strange and special. And that in itself can make you more anxious because you think, what's wrong with me? I'm okay during the day, but the closer to nighttime I approach, the more I feel like I'm coming apart. Nothing strange or unusual. Very, very many people have experienced this. In fact, I would say that every single person who has left an insomnia struggle would recognize this. They would be like, yeah, I had some of that or I had a lot of that, right? So nothing strange or unusual. I think that's really helpful to know. Now to the question though, like why do we have this, right? So firstly, I think it helps to ponder what the purpose is of the feeling that we know as anxiety. Why do we even have that? And the way I think of it is that anxiety is deployed for preparedness. Anxiety is in the like fear spectrum of emotions. It's a way we can experience fear. But more specifically, anxiety is like when we are or we're urged by our mind to prepare ourselves for something that is going to happen. It's like, hey, you better do something about this. Something's going to happen. That's kind of anxiety is deployed for us to be prepared for something. So, what is it that we're preparing ourselves for as the night falls? Well, if we have lived in a world where the night has become essentially a battle, where every night we're trying to get sleep but we're not getting any, so we're trying harder, and we're doing the blackout curtains, the gadgets, the supplements, the medications, yet sleep is escaping us, and we're like, I have to do more. Then it's not surprising, actually, to see that we become more anxious the closer to bedtime it becomes, because in our mind, our brain has kind of classified the night as like a battle. Night is a battle, and it will deploy then anxiety the closer we get to that point in its version of reality. It's like, we better be prepared for this battle, so we better start becoming anxious or deploying anxiety as we approach that. So essentially, that's why we have sunset anxiety. It's like it's a way that our brain thinks we should be becoming prepared for something. But when you hear this, like, you may think like, well, how does this make sense? Like, what is there a battle with? Like, who's the opponent? Who's the enemy in this scenario? Well, what our brain has misclassified as a threat or danger or enemy, if you will, is actually wakefulness. Wakefulness as a night is what has been misclassified as a threat. And it may have started randomly. We were stressed for some reason. We were up a little bit late. Happens to all of us, right? Because vigilance is part of like anxiety, actually, and preparedness, right? But then our brain can misclassify this as a threat and go like, oh, I was awake too much. I should have slept. Why didn't I sleep? That's the moment where wakefulness at night becomes tagged or identified as the enemy, and then a battle can ensue. And it becomes a very tricky battle, because you cannot defeat wakefulness. You cannot outrun wakefulness. In fact, the more things we try to do to battle with wakefulness at night, the more riled up we become, the more anxious we become, and the more awake we become. So this can become this, ongoing self-perpetuating struggle that we call insomnia. And again, when our brain wants to prepare us for that, it deploys anxiety. And now when we see this, it makes logical sense that in the morning, our brain may be like, okay, nothing we need to worry about right now. But in the afternoon or in the evening, it's like, okay, now we better get ready. Now's the time to prepare, right? And it deploys more and more anxiety the closer we get to the night. It's very similar to many, many other things in life. Let's say you have like a presentation in school, and it's like 4 weeks away, and the brain goes like, nothing to worry about. But like, when it gets closer, like a week before, and like, okay, better get ready. And then like 3 days before, like, now you must work on this now, et cetera, et cetera. Just just an example of how the same phenomenon, if you will, that creates sunset anxiety is one that we are familiar with in other aspects of our lives. So now that we understand sunset anxiety and we understand why it is so common, the question, of course, becomes, how do you meet this situation? If you struggle with sunset anxiety, you of course want to know, what do I do? So I think the first thing is to know not only that this is common, nothing strange or unusual, but also that sunset anxiety is actually evidence not of something being wrong with you, but rather something being very right with you. It's evidence of a healthy, normal, functioning human brain that has just been a little confused, thinking that there is a threat when there is no real threat. And so when we approach things this way, and we start to see that, oh, what I'm going through is not only normal and common, but it's actually evidence of a perfectly functioning brain that's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. The only quote unquote problem here is that there's been a misunderstanding. Then we're normalizing. And normalizing in itself is really, really helpful, because when we think, no, this is not normal, something strange and unusual is happening, that leads us to effort. That leads us thinking, I have to fix this. I have to do something about it. I have to intervene. I have to do something practically to make myself sleep, which creates more and more struggle sleeping. On the other hand, when we say like, oh, I understand all this, I'm normalizing all this, that leads us to a path of less intervention, less effort, because we see, I don't want to intervene or do something here, because that just becomes part of the problem. And we're on the path of less intervention, less effort, really, really helpful. So A, again, knowing that what you're going through signals that you have a healthy mind, a healthy brain. So B here is knowing that emotions become stronger the more we attempt to block them. It's the old saying of what we try to push away becomes stronger, or maybe we hear this one more, what is the expression here? It's gonna come to me. We'll just wait for it. If you know the expression line and it hasn't been posted in the comments, please post it there for me. You know which one I mean. All right. So with that said, this sunset anxiety works the exact same way. Sunset anxiety fades as we no longer try to stop it, and it grows the more we try to suppress it. And why is this? Why is it that when we try to suppress emotions, they become stronger? What's the logical rationale behind them? The way I think of it is that thoughts and emotions are communication, and they function the exact same way as messages and signals do when we're trying to communicate with another person. If I have something really important that I want to try to tell you, and I think it really matters to you, and you ignore me, you're like not texting me back, then I'll try to call you. If you don't pick up the phone, I'll go to your house and be like, hey, friend, you need to know this. My attempts to communicate with you becomes more amplified the more you try to block me, or the more it seems to me as you're trying to block me. On the other hand, if you're like, I get you, I hear you, talk to me, then I'm like, okay, good. The message was received, communication was received, nothing more for me to do, right? So when we have this sunset anxiety and we're like, I shouldn't feel this way, I have to stop it, then that like our brain really wants to communicate with us, like, no, you got to listen to it. This is really important. On the other hand, when we go like, I have the sunset anxiety, and I can sit with it, I can let that emotion be, that signals to our brain that, oh, the communication was received, nothing further needed there. So the communication, if you will, fades rather than is amplified when we're no longer trying to stop it. Very, very helpful. Finally here, if you find that you can do something as the night falls, as it's time for like the night, in terms of like the day's over, all your obligations are done, but now it's the night where it's the time for rest, for sleep, for no obligations. If you can find something for that time that instead of going like, okay, I'm getting closer and closer to bedtime, am I going to sleep? What can I do to sleep? How am I going to do this? What's going to happen tonight? Instead of being in that mindset, we go like, okay, we can't control sleep, can't control our emotions, but maybe I can do something at the end of the day that brings me some joy or some peace of mind, or that feels nice and kind and gentle for myself. Anything like that is really, really helpful, because it takes us away again from the battle, and we do something that is kind of completely separated from sleep. So we do something that we just look forward to, that has the intent is kind of completely unrelated to sleep. I can do this just because I like it. It's not going to impact my sleep, but at least instead of the sunset anxiety where I'm kind of dreading that my dread grows as the hours tick by, then instead it becomes like, okay, it's going to become night at some point, and I'm going to look forward to this thing that I'm going to do. That can be really, really helpful. So in summary, what to do is really education, I think. The only thing in my world where we can deploy a bit of effort that can be really helpful is educating ourselves, because from education flows effortlessness and kindness. And when you're no longer confused and trying to have control, then yes, you'll find a peaceful sleep and peace of mind come to you. I hope this was really helpful for you. Let me know in the comment section what you thought, and if you have any questions, and we shall go from there. Thanks for today. Have you found yourself feeling relatively okay as you go to bed, but your anxiety rises as the time passes forward to peak when you see the first rays of the sun? If this sounds familiar to you, you've experienced what we call sunrise anxiety, and this episode is for you. We're going to see what sunrise anxiety is, how to meet it, and we're going to spend some time discussing a key element here, which is understanding surrender sleep. Let's take a look. Welcome. If you're new to the channel, a special welcome to you. And if you are a returning viewer, special welcome to you. Of course, as well. And I actually have some shout outs today. This episode where we talk about sunrise anxiety is a sort of a follow-up to the most recent insomnia episode, which is 545, where we talked about sunset anxiety. And you know, very quickly, the sunset anxiety, that idea actually came from our chatbot Ellie, our like chat GPT uh, um, yeah, bot that I designed and which is working within BedTyme, and it came up with this idea of sunset anxiety, or the terminology sunset anxiety. And very easily from then you can see there's another very common form of experiencing anxiety around the time and around sleep, which is sunrise anxiety. So this is kind of a very natural follow-up, which many people commented on in the comments to the previous episode. But a special shout out to maybe Jamie King 7477 and Manfred Conan 7479, who helped out when I couldn't find this expression. What do you resist persists. There are many versions of that, but thanks to both of you for sharing that in the comment section. It was very helpful. It was always frustrating. There's something you want to say, but you just can't find it, and you both helped me a lot with that. So with that said, yeah, let's jump into this episode. We are gonna look at how we can understand this phenomenon of sunrise anxiety. We're gonna see how we can meet it, and we're gonna add kind of a special, an extra little section here on surrender sleep, which is a different expression that we use in our teachings, but it fits so nicely here, so we had to add it, I thought. So anyway, with that said, let's understand sunrise anxiety, and we already talked in the intro about what that means. Sunrise anxiety is really when we get more and more anxious as time passes throughout the night, and we feel like really, really panicky when we realize that it is actually morning, the sun is rising, or the birds start singing, or you hear the garbage truck is like picking up garbage on your street, or for some reason that it is morning, the night is almost over, right? And then you feel really, really anxious at that point. That's what we call sunrise anxiety. And I think we all, where I often really want to start is here, that point out that what you've experienced, if you have experienced this, is something that many who have left the insomnia struggle have. I think it's always so nice to know that you're definitely not alone if you've experienced this. And I before I just edited these little things that you see on the screen here, and I said, initially I said, know that you experienced something that everyone who's left insomnia did. And I felt like, how do I know that everyone has? And I don't think it's necessarily true that everyone has, but I changed that to many. And you may wonder, like, how can you know this, Daniel? You haven't done like a research study on this or anything, but I have talked to perhaps more people who have left insomnia than anyone on the planet. I don't know that for sure, but I think I must be one of the people who's talked to the most people who left the struggle. And something that I've taken note of is the following: whenever I have our coaches or I have a guest on the channel and I ask them, like, did you experience this? The answer is almost always yes. And how about this? Yes. And so what I've realized is that when you've left insomnia, or you had insomnia, you've almost always experienced not only like one facet of it, but all facets of it. And the reason I'm bringing this up again is just to emphasize for you, if you had this sunrise anxiety experience, to know that you're definitely not alone. Very, very, very common experience. Now, to fully understand it, I think in this for this topic of sunrise anxiety, it can be really helpful to think of insomnia as a performance anxiety. Insomnia can really be understood as a performance anxiety, where we have had trouble sleeping for some reason. We slept little, and we're starting to think, oh no, I've lost my ability to sleep, or I can't sleep anymore. I've forgotten how to sleep. I have to kind of push myself to be able to do that again. I have to try harder to do what I could before, but I can't now. And the tricky thing there, of course, is that sleep is a passive automatic process. And when we go like, I have to try, and we're putting in effort and we are pressuring ourselves, then we actually sleep less. So it becomes a performance anxiety where, the more we try to perform, the less we sleep and the more anxious we become. Now, with this in mind, we can see that when it's let's say, bedtime, when we go to bed, and let's say we have several hours until the morning, then there is less pressure actually at this point, in the context of sunrise anxiety here. When we're thinking that I have to sleep, but I have plenty of time. With that in mind, we can see that there's less pressure as the night begins, and this is why you may have had a bit of the sunrise anxiety, but sometimes you fall asleep easily at night, because there's less pressure at that point. So even if you're somewhat anxious about sleep, and you're to some degree trying to sleep, like there's some effort there, it may not be enough to keep you awake, so to speak. So you may find that you fall asleep some nights easily. Now, other nights on the we may have more pressure, and there's more of this kind of performance thinking, and that keeps us awake. And what then happens is that even though when we initially went to bed, our anxiety wasn't that high because we had plenty of time to quote unquote perform, with the passing of time, we think like, oh no, now I only have this many hours left. Now I only have this many hours left. Now I only have this many hours left. And you can see how our anxiety increases because our chance to sleep is diminishing as the hours tick by, and our kind of our performance anxiety increases because we're like, oh, now I only have this little time to quote unquote perform, to exert my skill here. So the closer we get to the end of the night, the more pressure and anxiety to sleep, and which of course keeps us awake. And all this was again to explain why we can have the sunrise anxiety phenomenon, where the closer we get to the sun rising, the more anxious we become because of the diminishing amount of time we have to quote unquote perform. And so to understanding sunrise anxiety, I think really is about thinking about a scenario where sleep has become sort of a task or skill, and then sunrise anxiety can follow from that. Now, if you think this sounds familiar to you, you of course wondered, what to do. So naturally, we go to our second section here, which is meeting sunrise anxiety. And I think again, emphasizing that you're not alone, and a different aspect of looking at this is like knowing that what you experience is actually evidence of a normal, healthy, functioning brain. When when our brain has started to think that this is very important, and I have to try harder to do this, then of course it will push us to do it. It will make us more anxious, so that we perform, so that we try harder, so that we get the results we want. Right? That is completely normal, actually. But the tricky thing with sunrise anxiety is that it's based on a misunderstanding. There isn't a task that can be performed. In fact, sleep is passive, right? So even though sunrise anxiety can feel like something must be wrong, this shouldn't be happening, it's actually evidence of a brain doing exactly what it's designed to do. There's just been a misunderstanding. Then the misunderstanding is that there is no actual skill to be performed. Sleep is not a skill. It's not an ability. It's not something that happens to us the harder we try. And when we see this, that really sets us us on a path of like less trying, less effort, and letting go, and that leads to no performance anxiety and no sunrise anxiety as well. So that's the first aspect, which I call A, and then B here is just an emphasis on something we talk about often, which is that all emotions become stronger the more we try to block them. And same with that, the anxiety that grows with the passing of time, that it's the same as any other anxiety we find. Like if we notice that, oh my gosh, I'm becoming more anxious the closer to sunrise, I have to stop that feeling. I don't want to be anxious. I have to calm myself down. That's not going to be helpful, because emotions are essentially our brain's way to communicate with us. And just as if a friend of ours has something they want to tell us, and we're like, no, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. And they think they have something really important to tell us. They're going to try even harder. Same thing plays out internally. So if we try to block anxiety that happens to happen the closer it gets to sunrise, excess anxiety always does. It becomes even stronger, right? So knowing this, we can find it easier to not try to stop the anxiety, even if it's uncomfortable, and that helps. And see here, we can find ourselves often awake at night, and we're thinking about the passing of time and how little time we will have left to sleep, et cetera, et cetera. And simply saying like, well, think of something else is not always that easy. So what can happen in this scenario is that it can be helpful to find any activity, anything to do that you don't do to try to distract yourself, and not to try to sleep or anything like that, but just something that you find is nice and gentle and easy, and something that makes that period when you're awake at night a little more bearable, a little bit more easy. That can be really, really helpful. So that can also be really, really helpful. And then finally, surrender sleep. What is surrender sleep? Surrender sleep is what we call it when somebody has experienced the following. Somebody who says, I'm up all night, but I finally fall asleep as the sun rises. Uh, and this is, as you can hear, it sounds very similar to the experience with surrender sleep, but here with it sounds very similar to sunrise anxiety, but with surrender sleep, we already know how it ends. It ends with us finally sleeping as the sun rises. And so I thought these topics are actually very related, because the person that that talks, has experienced surrender sleep has also experienced sunrise anxiety, right? It's just we can look at surrender sleep as a way that sunrise anxiety ends, not the experience of sunrise anxiety, but the kind of individual night when we had sunrise anxiety. Now, the question, of course, because why is this that we sometimes find that we finally sleep as the sun comes up? Well, it is because now that time to perform is over. The night is over. It is morning. It is time to get up. And now it is no longer the time where we're supposed to sleep. So when we sort of give up on that, when we say like, well, the night is over. I tried all night to sleep, but I didn't get a wink. Well, now it's time to get up. Well, guess what? The trying is over. The performance is over. And then we can find that we finally fall asleep when we have actually surrendered, when we have quote unquote given up on sleep. And this is really helpful to see, because it illustrates what we always talk about, that sleep is a passive process. It happens when we have stopped trying, right? And from there, we can see that, surrendering is something we can do at any point in time. It doesn't have to be that we wait until it's finally, sun is finally coming up and it's morning, and that's when we finally surrender. Surrender can happen before that. We can actually go into the night with a surrender mindset, meaning like we go into the night with the mindset of like, what happens happens, and I'm not going to try to sleep. We have already quote unquote surrendered, in a sense that not surrendered as in kind of like, admitted defeat or anything like that, but surrender as in kind of like just acknowledging that there are things in life that cannot be controlled. Sleep is one of them, and we can have this willingness to experience whatever happens. Surrender as in kind of like surrender the attempts to control sleep is what it really refers to, and that's really, really helpful. So in summary, what to do is really education, I think, really understanding, because from education flows self-kindness and effortlessness and everything else that we value so much in life. Let us conclude there. Let me know in the comment section what you thought about this episode, and thanks for being here. Bye for now. They say that the best things in life are free, and I truly hope that this free video helps you rediscover something else that is free, which is peaceful sleep. If you do find our content here helpful, then please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, share it with people, because the more views we get, the more people we reach, the more chances of changing lives we have. The thing is, leaving insomnia for good is actually so simple. You can and will rediscover a beautiful life at the end of this sleepless tunnel. So yes, please share it with people, hit the subscribe button, and you will be a big part of leading the change that we so want to see in the sleep universe. Thank you.